Zara Velthane pressed her long blue fingers against the cold metal surface of the laboratory table as she stared at the data floating before her eyes. The holographic display showed countless numbers and charts about human behavior patterns. But what caught her attention was something the Zephyrian Empire had never expected to find on such a primitive planet. Love. Real. Pure, illogical love that made humans do impossible things. Beside her, Luna Kessmore adjusted her silver hair and pointed at one particular section of their research. Her large, luminous eyes reflected the data as she whispered to her research partner. They had been studying Earth's population for 3 years now, hidden away in the deepest levels of the Research Academy on their home planet of Zephyr Prime. What they discovered would change everything, and they both knew it. The Zephyrian Empire ruled over 47 star systems with cold precision and perfect logic. Their people had evolved beyond primitive emotions centuries ago, engineering themselves into beings of pure intellect and efficiency. Every decision was made based on mathematical calculations and resource optimization. Love was considered a disease that had been cured long ago, just like fear, anger, and hope. Zara stood up from her workstation and walked to the massive window that showed the crystal spires of their capital city. Everything was perfect, clean, and ordered. No crime, no waste, no chaos, but also no laughter, no tears, no embraces between family members. Children were raised in educational facilities and assigned to parents based on genetic compatibility charts. Marriage was a contract for breeding purposes, and friendship existed only for professional advancement. Luna joined her at the window, carrying a small device that contained 3 years of research about humanity. The humans they studied were so different from Zephyrians. Where logic should have made them abandon the weak, humans instead protected their elderly and disabled. Where efficiency should have made them focus only on personal gain, humans instead sacrificed themselves for strangers. Where mathematics should have guided their choices, humans instead followed something they called their hearts. The most shocking discovery was how this illogical behavior actually made humans stronger, not weaker. Their military forces fought harder when protecting loved ones. Their scientists made breakthrough discoveries when motivated by desire to help others. Their societies flourished when built on cooperation rather than domination. Everything the Zephyrian Empire believed about evolution and survival was wrong. Zara had spent weeks analyzing footage of human parents with their children. The way they looked at their offspring had no logical explanation. Parents would work multiple jobs, sacrifice sleep, and give up their own dreams just to make their children happy. In Zephyrian society, such behavior would be classified as mental illness and treated with neural adjustment therapy. Luna had focused her research on human, romantic relationships. She watched couples grow old together, supporting each other through sickness and hardship when logic dictated they should find younger, healthier partners. She saw humans choose love over wealth, choose loyalty over advantage, choose their hearts over their minds thousands of times every day. The two researchers had become closer during their work, spending 80-hour days together in the laboratory. They shared meals, discussed theories, and supported each other. Through the confusion of discovering that everything they had been taught about civilization was incomplete, Luna found herself looking forward to seeing Zara each morning. Zara noticed how Luna's laugh made her feel something she had no words for in her language. When they finally completed their research, both women knew they had to share it with the High Council. The discovery was too important to keep hidden. If the Zephyrian Empire could learn from human emotional intelligence while maintaining their technological advantages, they could become something greater than either species had achieved alone. Admiral Vex Kane received their request for an audience with barely concealed disgust. The rigid military leader had commanded the fleet that conquered the Andorian system and believed that primitive species existed only to serve the Empire or be eliminated. The idea that humans might possess something valuable was offensive to everything he represented. The presentation hall was filled with the Empire's most powerful leaders when Zara and Luna entered. The High Council sat in perfect rows, their blue faces showing no emotion as the two young researchers began to explain their findings. They showed videos of human cooperation, displayed statistical evidence of improved performance when humans were motivated by love, and presented theories about how emotional intelligence could enhance Zephyrian society. The silence that followed their presentation was deafening. Then Admiral Vexcane stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow across the room. His voice was calm and cold as he spoke about the danger of contamination from primitive species. He accused Zara and Luna of being infected by human weakness, of losing their rational minds to the very disease their people had evolved beyond. Other council members joined the condemnation. They spoke of the importance of maintaining Zephyrian purity and the dangers of regression to primitive emotional states. Several suggested that the two researchers needed immediate neural adjustment to correct their thinking errors. Others proposed that their research be destroyed and their memories wiped clean, but Admiral Vexcane had a different punishment in mind. He stood before the assembly and declared that Zara and Luna had been corrupted beyond redemption by their contact with human culture. The only appropriate response was banishment to the very planet they claimed to admire. They would be stripped of their technology, their citizenship, and their place in civilized society. The sentence was carried out within hours. Zara and Luna were given basic survival supplies and rough clothing before being loaded onto a transport ship. Their families were notified that they no longer existed as far as the Empire was concerned. Their research was classified as dangerous propaganda and scheduled for destruction. As the transport ship carried them away from everything they had ever known, Zara and Luna sat in silence, still processing the speed of their fall from respected scientists to exiled criminals. Through the small window, they watched Zephyr Prime grow smaller until it disappeared among the stars. The ship's pilot, following orders, deposited them in the remote mountains of a place called Colorado on the planet Earth. The pilot said nothing as they gathered their few possessions and stepped onto the alien soil. The transport ship lifted off immediately, leaving them alone under a strange sky filled with only one sun. Snow began to fall as they stood together on the mountainside, two brilliant minds suddenly reduced to basic survival needs. Everything they had worked for was gone. Everyone they had cared about was now forbidden from acknowledging their existence. All they had left was each other and the harsh, beautiful world that surrounded them. Zara looked at Luna and saw fear in her friend's luminous eyes. But she also saw something else, something their research had taught them to recognize even if they couldn't fully understand it yet. She saw the beginning of the very emotion that had led to their exile. The same force that made humans do impossible things for people they loved. The first 2 weeks on Earth nearly killed them both. Zara and Luna had never experienced real cold before, not the kind that seeped through their thin clothes and made their bones ache. On Zephyr Prime, temperature was always perfectly controlled, and their bodies had no natural defenses against the harsh mountain winter that surrounded them now. They found shelter in a small cave on the second day, but finding food proved almost impossible. The emergency rations from their survival kit lasted only 4 days, and neither woman knew how to hunt or identify safe plants to eat. Luna tried to catch fish from a nearby stream with her bare hands, but the icy water numbed her fingers so quickly that she could barely move them. Zara attempted to build snares from materials in their kit, but without proper knowledge she only wasted precious supplies. Water was easier to find than food, but even that presented challenges. The stream was freezing and they had no way to purify it properly. Both women suffered from stomach problems after drinking the mountain water, making their already desperate situation even worse. They took turns standing guard while the other rested, afraid that Earth's wildlife might attack them during their weakest moments. By the end of the first week, they were both losing weight rapidly. Zara's blue skin had turned pale, and Luna could barely walk more than a few steps without stopping to catch her breath. They huddled together in their cave for warmth, sharing body heat, and trying to preserve what little energy they had left. Neither spoke about their fears, But both understood that they might not survive another week in these conditions. The second week brought a snowstorm that trapped them in the cave for 3 days. They melted snow for drinking water and tried to stay warm by exercising, but their movements became slower and weaker as hunger took its toll. Luna developed a fever that made her delirious, and Zara feared her friend might die before they found help. On the third night of the storm, Zara made a decision that went against all her survival training. She would leave the cave and search for human settlement, even if it meant exposing their presence to the primitive species they had studied. The storm cleared on the fourth day, and Zara helped Luna to her feet. They gathered their remaining supplies and began walking down the mountain, hoping to find some sign of human civilization. Snow covered everything, making it difficult to navigate, and they had to stop frequently to rest. Luna's fever had broken, but she was still weak and stumbled often on the uneven ground. They had been walking for several hours when they heard a strange sound echoing through the forest. It was rhythmic and mechanical, unlike anything they had encountered in their 2 weeks of wilderness survival. Following the sound, they discovered a narrow path that had been cleared through the trees, and strange parallel marks in the snow that they would later learn were tire tracks. The sound grew louder as they followed the path, and eventually they saw a human vehicle approaching through the trees. Panic struck both women as they realized they were about to have their first direct contact with the species they had only observed from a distance. Zara grabbed Luna's hand and pulled her behind a large tree, but they were both too weak to run far, and the vehicle stopped just a few feet from their hiding spot. A tall human male stepped out of the vehicle, wearing thick clothing and carrying equipment they didn't recognize. He had dark hair and kind eyes, and he moved through the forest with confidence that suggested familiarity with this environment. The man looked around carefully, and Zara realized he had spotted their footprints in the snow. There was no use hiding anymore. Jake Morrison had been a park ranger in these mountains for 8 years, and he knew when something was out of place. The footprints he followed were wrong somehow, too narrow and too long to belong to any human he knew. When 2 figures emerged from behind the tree, his first thought was that someone was playing an elaborate prank with movie costumes and makeup. But the way they moved, weak and desperate, told him these were real beings in serious trouble. The blue-tinted skin and large eyes should have terrified him. But Jake's military training and medical experience kicked in instead. These creatures, whatever they were, needed immediate help. One was clearly sick, leaning heavily on her companion, and both showed signs of severe malnutrition and exposure. His questions about their origins could wait until after he made sure they survived. The next few hours, Jake approached slowly, keeping his hands visible and speaking in a calm voice. He had no idea if they understood English, but tone was universal, and he wanted them to know he meant no harm. When he offered them water from his canteen, they accepted gratefully, drinking more than was probably safe for their dehydrated bodies. He gave them energy bars from his pack and watched as they ate with desperate hunger that confirmed his assessment of their condition. Getting them to his cabin required careful planning. They were too weak to walk the full distance, and his vehicle wasn't designed for passengers. Jake made multiple trips, first carrying Luna, who was barely conscious, then returning for Zara, who insisted on walking as far as she could manage. The cabin was only 2 miles from where he found them, but it took most of the afternoon to get them both there safely. The warmth of the cabin seemed to revive them slightly, and Jake immediately began treating them for hypothermia and dehydration. His medical training from his army days had taught him to focus on immediate needs first and ask questions later. He wrapped them in warm blankets, prepared hot soup that they could digest easily, and made sure they drank water slowly to avoid making themselves sick. That first night, Jake slept on his couch while the 2 strangers shared his bed. He kept a fire burning in the fireplace and checked on them regularly, but they slept deeply, their bodies finally able to rest in safety and warmth. By morning, their color had improved, and both seemed more alert and responsive. Communication began with simple gestures and single words. Jake pointed to himself and said his name repeatedly until they understood. Zara was the first to attempt English, her pronunciation strange but understandable. Luna learned faster, and within days she could manage basic sentences. They taught Jake their names in return, and he practiced the unfamiliar sounds until he could say them correctly. Jake asked no questions about where they came from or why they were in his mountains. His instincts told him they were refugees from something terrible, and that was enough for him. He had seen enough war and suffering to recognize people who needed help without judgment. Whatever had brought these strange women to Earth, they were under his protection now, and that was all that mattered to him in those first crucial days of their new lives together. Spring arrived in the mountains with a warmth that seemed to heal more than just the frozen ground. Zara and Luna had spent the winter months recovering their strength and learning about human life from Jake, but they still felt like observers, watching a strange and wonderful species from the outside. That changed when Jake decided it was time for them to meet other humans in the nearby town of Pine Ridge. The first trip to town terrified both alien women. They wore heavy coats and hats that Jake had given them, hoping to hide their unusual features from curious eyes. Their blue-tinted skin was less noticeable in winter light, and their large eyes could be explained as a family trait if anyone asked too many questions. Jake had coached them on how to behave around other humans, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality of walking among the people they had studied for so long. Pine Ridge was a small mountain community with fewer than 2,000 residents. Most people knew each other, and strangers were noticed quickly but welcomed warmly. Jake introduced his new friends as distant relatives who had come to stay with him after losing their home in a fire. The story explained their strange accent, their unfamiliarity with common objects, and their tendency to stare at everything with wide-eyed wonder. Their first stop was the local medical clinic, where Jake wanted them to meet Dr. Helen Carter. The doctor was a woman in her 50s who had moved to Pine Ridge after retiring from a successful practice in Denver. She could have continued making large amounts of money in the city, but instead chose to serve a community that could barely afford basic health care. The clinic operated mostly on donations and volunteer work, treating everyone regardless of their ability to pay. Zara watched Dr. Carter examine an elderly man who had injured his back while chopping wood. The doctor's equipment was primitive compared to Zephyrian medical technology, but her approach to healing fascinated the alien scientist. Dr. Carter spent time talking to her patient about his family, his worries about money, and his fears about getting older. She touched his shoulder gently while explaining his condition, and her voice carried genuine concern that had nothing to do with professional duty. The old man left the clinic walking straighter than when he arrived, and Zara realized that his improvement came from more than just the pain medication Dr. Carter had given him. The human doctor had treated his emotional pain as carefully as his physical injury, giving him hope and dignity along with medical care. In Zephyrian society, such behavior would be considered inefficient waste of time and resources. Luna was more interested in the local school where Jake volunteered as a guest speaker for outdoor education programs. The teacher, Maria Santos, was a young woman who had grown up in Pine Ridge and returned after college to teach the next generation of mountain children. She worked with limited supplies and outdated textbooks, but her classroom buzzed with energy and curiosity that impressed both alien visitors. They observed Maria working with a student who struggled with reading. According to Zephyrian educational protocols, such a child would be identified as intellectually inferior and assigned to manual labor tasks. But Maria refused to give up on the boy, spending her lunch breaks and after-school time helping him find new ways to learn. She discovered that he was brilliant with numbers and spatial relationships, just not with traditional reading methods. The breakthrough came when Maria started teaching him to read using mathematical concepts and visual patterns. Within weeks, the struggling student was reading at grade level and helping other children with math problems. Luna watched this transformation with growing amazement, realizing that human education succeeded not through rigid efficiency, but through individual attention and emotional investment. The most profound example of human strength came during their third month in Pine Ridge. The Peterson family lost their home when an electrical fire spread too quickly for the volunteer fire department to stop. Tom Peterson, a construction worker, and his wife Nancy who worked at the local grocery store, stood in their yard watching everything they owned turn to ash. Their two young children clung to their parents, crying as they watched their toys and clothes disappear in the flames. What happened next challenged everything Zara and Luna believed about logical behavior. Without any central authority organizing the response, the entire town mobilized to help the Peterson family. Neighbors opened their homes, offering rooms for the displaced family to stay as long as needed. Local businesses donated clothes, furniture, and household items. The hardware store provided building materials at cost, and dozens of volunteers showed up every weekend to help rebuild the house. Jake participated in the reconstruction effort, and Zara and Luna joined him, eager to understand this spontaneous cooperation. They watched electricians work alongside teachers, shopkeepers carry lumber with farmers, and elderly residents provide food for younger workers. No one was forced to participate, no one was paid for their labor, and no one expected anything. In return for their contribution, the project took 3 months to complete, but the new house was actually better than the original. Volunteers had added improvements and upgrades that the Peterson family could never have afforded on their own. More importantly, the family's trauma from losing their home had been transformed into gratitude for their community's support. The children who had been devastated by the fire now spoke proudly about how their neighbors had helped them. Zara found herself working alongside Dr. Carter one Saturday afternoon, both of them painting bedroom walls while discussing the reconstruction project. The doctor explained that helping others wasn't a burden or an obligation, but actually made her feel happier and more connected to her community. This concept of gaining satisfaction from giving to others had no equivalent in Zephyrian psychology. Luna spent her volunteer time working with Maria Santos to organize donated school supplies for the Peterson children. The teacher had noticed that the fire had destroyed not just the family's possessions, but also their children's confidence and sense of security. Maria developed special activities to help the children process their trauma while rebuilding their self-esteem. Her approach combined practical education with emotional healing in ways that Zephyrian specialists would never consider. As summer approached, both alien women began to understand that their research had only scratched the surface of human complexity. The emotional intelligence they had documented in their scientific studies was not a weakness that humans had failed to evolve beyond, but rather a sophisticated system that enhanced every aspect of their society. Human cooperation succeeded, precisely because it was based on choice rather than compulsion, on empathy rather than efficiency. But the most significant discovery was happening within themselves. Living among humans had awakened feelings and desires that Zephyrian society had tried to eliminate from their species. Zara found herself looking forward to Luna's smile each morning and worrying when her friend seemed troubled. Luna noticed how her heart beat faster when Zara touched her hand, and how empty she felt when they were separated even briefly. Neither woman had words in their native language for what they were experiencing, but they had learned enough about human emotion to recognize the signs of something their people had forgotten how to feel. They were falling in love, and for the first time in their lives, they understood why humans considered it worth fighting for. Summer brought wildflowers to the mountain meadows and something equally beautiful to the hearts of Zara and Luna. The feelings that had been growing between them throughout the spring finally found expression in quiet moments when Jake was away on his ranger duties. They would sit together by the stream behind his cabin, their hands touching as they watched the water flow over smooth stones, both wondering if what they felt was real or just confusion from living so far from everything they had known. The first time Luna kissed Zara, it happened during a thunderstorm that had trapped them alone in the cabin. Lightning illuminated the room in brief flashes while rain drummed against the windows, and something about the wild energy of the storm made Luna brave enough to act on feelings she had been hiding for months. The kiss was gentle and uncertain, neither woman sure of what they were doing, but both knowing it felt more right than anything else in their strange new lives. Zara responded by pulling Luna closer, their blue skins seeming to glow in the firelight as they held each other with desperate tenderness. Neither spoke about what was happening between them, afraid that words might break the spell, but their bodies understood what their minds struggled to accept. They were experiencing the very emotion that had led to their exile, the same force that made humans do impossible things for the people they loved. Jake noticed the change in their relationship but said nothing directly about it. His quiet wisdom told him that his two house guests were discovering something precious and fragile, and his job was to protect the discovery rather than question it. When he found them sleeping curled together on the couch one morning, he simply covered them with a blanket and went about his business. When he saw them holding hands while walking through town, he positioned himself between them and anyone who might stare too long. The three had become a family of choice, bound together by shared experiences and mutual care rather than blood or law. Jake taught them practical skills like fishing, hunting, and wilderness navigation, while Zara and Luna shared their vast knowledge of science and technology in ways that seemed like natural human innovations. Luna helped Dr. Carter develop new treatment techniques that appeared to be based on holistic medicine but were actually adapted from Zephyrian healing methods. Zara worked with Maria Santos to create educational tools that helped children learn faster, using principles of cognitive development that wouldn't be discovered by human science for decades. Their peaceful existence faced its first serious threat when strange objects began appearing in the mountain skies during late summer. Jake spotted them first through his binoculars while conducting a routine patrol of the wilderness area. The objects moved too fast and too silently to be any aircraft he recognized, and their behavior suggested they were conducting systematic surveillance of the region rather than simply passing through. Zara and Luna knew immediately what the objects were when Jake described them. Zephyrian reconnaissance drones used advanced stealth technology that made them nearly invisible to primitive human detection systems, but their flight patterns and energy signatures were unmistakable to anyone who had worked with the technology. The Empire had found them, and that meant their peaceful life in Pine Ridge was about to end. The alien women explained the situation to Jake as carefully as they could without revealing too much about their advanced civilization. They told him that people from their homeland were looking for them, and that these people would not hesitate to harm anyone who had helped them. Jake listened to their explanation with the same calm acceptance he had shown when he first found them dying in the snow, but his military training was already analyzing the tactical situation. Commander, the HFY had been hunting the exiled scientists for months, following faint energy traces and investigating reports of unusual technological developments in remote human settlements. The Pine Ridge area had drawn his attention when satellite analysis detected medical techniques and educational methods that seemed too advanced for the local population's technological level. His orders from Admiral Vex Kane were clear: eliminate the traitors and anyone who had been contaminated by their influence. The Zephyrian commander brought a squad of elite soldiers equipped with weapons that could level the entire town in minutes. Their armor made them invisible to human detection, and their training had prepared them to view humans as barely sentient animals, whose lives had no value beyond their usefulness to the Empire. The HFY had personally overseen the conquest of 3 primitive civilizations, and he expected this mission to be equally straightforward, but Jake Morrison was not an ordinary human, and Pine Ridge was not an ordinary town. The park ranger's combat experience in Afghanistan had taught him to recognize when his position was being scouted by enemy forces, and his knowledge of the local terrain gave him advantages that no amount of advanced technology could overcome. More importantly, his months of living with Zara and Luna had taught him that there were things worth fighting for that went beyond simple survival. When Jake told them that he intended to defend them against their pursuers, both alien women tried to convince him to let them surrender. Luna argued that their presence had already brought too much danger to the people who had shown them kindness, and that the logical choice was to sacrifice themselves to protect the community. Zara agreed that staying would endanger innocent humans who had no part in their conflict with the Empire, but Jake had learned too much about the power of love to accept such logic. He had watched Zara and Luna transform from desperate refugees into confident women who contributed to their community in countless ways. He had seen how their relationship brought them joy that brightened everyone around them. Most importantly, he had come to love them both as the daughters he had never had, and no force in the galaxy would make him abandon family. The confrontation was coming whether they chose to face it or not, and Jake preferred to meet his enemies on ground of his choosing rather than wait for them to strike first. He began quietly alerting trusted members of the community about the potential threat, careful not to cause panic but ensuring that key people were prepared for whatever might come. Dr. Carter organized medical supplies and evacuation plans for the most vulnerable residents. Maria Santos worked with parents to develop safety protocols for the children. As the surveillance drones grew bolder in their reconnaissance, appearing in broad daylight over the town center, Jake made his final preparations for a battle that would determine not just their own fate, but the future relationship between two very different species. He cleaned his weapons, studied the terrain, and said prayers for the safety of everyone he cared about. Zara and Luna spent their last peaceful evening together on the porch of Jake's cabin, watching stars appear in the darkening sky and knowing that some of those points of light hid ships full of soldiers coming to destroy their newfound happiness. They held each other close and whispered promises about the future they hoped to build together, if they survived the coming storm. The attack came at sunrise on a Tuesday morning when most of Pine Ridge was just beginning to wake up. Commander HFY materialized his squad in the town square, their advanced armor shimmering as it adapted from invisibility to full visibility. The 6 Zephyrian soldiers stood in perfect formation, their weapons powered and ready, while early morning joggers stopped in confusion and fear at the sight of the blue-skinned aliens who had appeared from nowhere. Jake had been expecting this moment for weeks, and his preparations proved their worth immediately. The emergency signals he had distributed to key community members activated phone trees that spread warnings throughout the town in minutes. Dr. Carter began moving medical supplies to predetermined, safe locations while Maria Santos organized the evacuation of children to the school's reinforced basement. Within 20 minutes of the aliens' arrival, Pine Ridge had transformed from a sleepy mountain town into a coordinated defense network. Zara and Luna walked hand in hand toward the town square, knowing that hiding would only make things worse for the people who had protected them. Jake flanked them with his rifle ready, not because he believed human weapons could match Zephyrian technology, but because he refused to let them face their former people alone. Other townspeople emerged from buildings and vehicles, forming a loose circle around the alien soldiers despite the obvious danger they represented. Commander HFY stepped forward and addressed the gathered humans in perfect English, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. He identified himself as a representative of the Zephyrian Empire and demanded the immediate surrender of the 2 criminals who had corrupted themselves with primitive human emotions. He warned that anyone who interfered with imperial justice would be considered an enemy combatant and dealt with accordingly. The response he received was not what HFY had expected from a primitive species. Instead of panic and immediate compliance, the humans moved closer together, positioning themselves between the Zephyrian soldiers and their intended targets. Tom Peterson, whose house the community had rebuilt after the fire, stepped forward to speak for the group. His voice shook with nervousness, but his words carried conviction that surprised even himself. Tom told the alien commander that Zara and Luna were part of their community now, that they had helped people and made life better for everyone in Pine Ridge. He explained how Luna had helped his daughter overcome her learning difficulties and how Zara had shown Dr. Carter new ways to treat chronic pain. These women were not criminals in their eyes, but friends and neighbors who deserved protection rather than punishment. Other townspeople began adding their voices to Tom's testimony. Dr. Carter described the medical advances that Luna had helped her develop, techniques that had already saved 3 lives and improved the health of dozens more patients. Maria Santos spoke about the educational methods that Zara had shared, approaches that had transformed her classroom and helped struggling students discover their hidden talents. Commander HFY listened to these testimonials with growing confusion and anger. His military training had prepared him for resistance based on fear or territorial instincts, But this human behavior made no logical sense. These primitives were risking their lives to protect two members of a superior species who owed them nothing and could offer them no significant benefit in return. The situation became more complicated when one of the HFY's younger soldiers began asking questions that revealed dangerous thinking. Lieutenant Kexmere had been watching the human faces as they spoke about Zara and Luna, and something about their expressions reminded him of feelings he thought had been properly suppressed during his military conditioning. When Dr. Carter approached his position to treat a townsperson who had fainted from stress, he found himself accepting her help instead of pushing her away. The elderly woman who had collapsed was suffering from a heart condition that human medicine could barely manage, but Dr. Carter's treatment, enhanced by techniques Luna had taught her, stabilized the patient quickly and effectively. Lieutenant Kexmere watched the doctor work with gentle efficiency, never asking for payment or recognition, simply focused on reducing another being's suffering. When the old woman squeezed Dr. Carter's hand and whispered thanks through her tears, something shifted in the young soldier's understanding of what constituted strength. Zara chose that moment to step forward and address her former people directly. Speaking in their native language, she told them about the months she had spent learning from humans, about the discoveries she had made regarding the power of emotional connection, and about the love she had found with Luna that made her feel more alive than all her years of sterile scientific achievement. Her words carried passion and conviction that cut through military programming and reached the suppressed emotions that even Zephyrian conditioning could not completely eliminate. Luna joined her partner in the center of the square, taking Zara's hand as she continued the speech in English so that their human friends could understand. She spoke about the courage she had witnessed in this small mountain community, about people who worked together without being commanded, who sacrificed for strangers without expectation of reward, and who chose love over logic in ways that made their society stronger rather than weaker. The turning point came when Commander HFY ordered his soldiers to fire on the crowd to eliminate witnesses and complete their mission. 3 of his 6 soldiers hesitated, their weapons wavering, as they looked at the faces of humans who had shown them only kindness and curiosity despite the obvious threat they represented. Lieutenant Kexmere lowered his weapon completely and announced that he would not fire on innocent civilians, a declaration that shocked his commander and inspired 2 other soldiers to follow his example. Jake Morrison stepped between the remaining loyal soldiers and the crowd, his old hunting rifle pointed at Commander HFY's chest. The weapon was laughably primitive compared to Zephyrian technology, but Jake's steady hands and calm eyes suggested that he would use it regardless of the odds against him. Other townspeople moved to support him, forming a human shield around Zara and Luna that demonstrated the very unity and selflessness that had been the subject of their original research, faced with a mutiny among his own troops and surrounded by humans willing to die for principles they barely understood. Commander HFY found his certainty beginning to crack. The mission that had seemed so simple from the sterile halls of the Imperial fleet now appeared complex and morally ambiguous in ways his training had never prepared him to handle. The standoff ended not with violence, but with a choice that would echo across both civilizations. Commander HFY looked at his rebellious soldiers, at the determined humans, and at the 2 women whose love had started this chain of events, and finally understood what his empire had lost in its pursuit of logical perfection. He ordered his remaining loyal soldiers to stand down and opened a communication channel to Admiral Vexcane that would carry news of failure back to Zephyr Prime, but HFY no longer saw it as failure. Standing in a town square surrounded by beings who had chosen compassion over safety and love over logic, he began to understand that perhaps the real criminals were those who had tried to eliminate such beautiful impossibilities from the galaxy. As he prepared to face court-martial for refusing to complete his mission, the commander found himself hoping that other Zephyrians would someday have the chance to learn what he had discovered in the mountains of Earth.